My name is Valerie. I still remember that Thanksgiving dinner like it was yesterday. The room was filled with the warm glow of candles, and the air was heavy with the scent of a home-cooked meal. But it was far from a cozy family gathering. The moment my father looked me straight in the eye and said, "Still renting, Valerie?" was like a dagger piercing through my heart. The chatter around the table ceased, and all eyes were on me. I could feel the heat rising to my cheeks, but I held my composure. I simply replied that I was doing fine in my city apartment. However, he wasn't done. He leaned back in his chair with that same judgmental look and declared, "Your sister, Olivia, has 3 beautiful properties. And here you are, paying someone else's mortgage." He shook his head as if I were the biggest disappointment in the family. My mother, always quick to side with my father, nodded firmly in agreement. And just like that, the room fell into a deafening silence. My aunt, Helen, with her husband by her side, took a long sip of her wine. My cousin, Ethan, who had recently bought a fancy townhouse, suddenly became very interested in his plate. And Olivia, sitting at the far end of the table, perfectly put together as always, said not a single word in my defense. I felt a sharp, cold pain in my chest, but I refused to show my emotions. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket, took out my phone, and placed it face down in front of my father. He looked at me, then at the phone. I said nothing, just stared back at him, waiting. When he picked up the phone and turned it over, I watched his face intently. The moment his eyes landed on the property management portal I'd had opened since that morning, his face went completely pale. It was as if all the color had been sucked out of him in an instant. There, on the screen, was his full name, Richard Thompson, listed as the primary tenant of the 2-bedroom unit in the Hartford property I'd purchased 14 months ago. I'd bought it through my LLC, and my property management company had been handling everything. I'd let him rent it at a below-market rate, not wanting to complicate things, because despite his constant criticism, he was still my father. My mother stopped nodding, and for the first time in my memory, my father was speechless. I picked up my fork, took a bite of the sweet potato casserole, and let the silence speak for itself. This wasn't a sudden event. It was the result of years of hard work that my family had never bothered to notice. Let me take you back to when I was 22. I'd just graduated from college with a degree in business and a mountain of student loans that made me sick to my stomach every time I thought about them. I moved into a tiny studio apartment in New York City and started working as a junior analyst at a small to mid-size financial firm. I lived on a shoestring budget, packing my lunch every day for 3 long years. My father thought I was just scraping by, and my mother kept telling me to find a better-paying job. Olivia, who had married into a wealthy family, once sent me an article about salary negotiation without any context. What they didn't know was that I wasn't just surviving. I was studying. Every free moment I had, I was reading about real estate investment, analyzing market trends, and talking to successful investors. I gave up buying new clothes and taking vacations. I saved every penny with an almost obsessive focus because I knew that the only way to stop being looked down upon was to build something they couldn't ignore. By the time I was 26, I had saved enough for a down payment on a small 2-family house in a mid-sized city in New Jersey. It wasn't in a trendy area, but it was a solid investment that started generating cash flow from the very first month. I continued living in my apartment and maintained my frugal lifestyle. I reinvested all the profits. I never told my family about my property because I wasn't ready for their questions, unsolicited advice, and comparisons to Olivia's more visible success. I needed to build in silence. By 29, I had 2 properties, and by 31, I had acquired a third. The Hartford unit, the one my father was renting, came about almost by chance. A colleague mentioned a landlord who needed to sell quickly due to a job relocation. The numbers worked out, so I bought it through my LLC, just like I'd done with the others. I had no idea my father had applied for that unit until 3 months after he moved in. I was doing a routine review of my portfolio when I saw his name on the lease. I was tempted to call him right away. I picked up the phone, but then I put it back down. I knew how the conversation would go. He'd either say I was lucky or that the market was just favorable, and he'd quickly shift the topic to something Olivia had accomplished. So, I decided to say nothing and let the management company handle it as a regular tenancy. For 14 months, my father paid his rent on time. Little did he know he was paying rent to an LLC owned by his daughter, the so-called embarrassment of the family. After that Thanksgiving dinner, the drive home was the quietest 2 hours of my life. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence, it was more like the calm after a storm. My phone buzzed twice before I even reached the highway. It was my mother and then my father. I let both calls go to voicemail. I didn't listen to the messages until the next morning. My father's voice was different. It was flat and cautious. He said he had some questions and would appreciate it if I called him when I had time. There was no apology, not yet. But the overconfident, domineering voice was gone, replaced by a softer tone. That told me more than any apology could have. 3 days later, I called him back. We talked for almost an hour. He asked how long I'd owned the property, and I told him. He went silent. Then he asked about my other properties, and I shared those details too. After a long pause, he said, in a voice I'd never heard from him before, I didn't know. I told him I was aware of that. He didn't ask for forgiveness out loud, but something changed in that conversation. I no longer felt angry. I just felt tired of keeping the secret and strangely relieved that the burden was finally being shared. He's still my tenant, and he pays his rent on time. We talk more openly and honestly now than we have in years. And Olivia called me the following week, asking if we could have coffee. She showed up looking less composed than usual. She said she had no idea what I'd been doing and apologized for not asking. That conversation meant the world to me. I'm not sharing this story to shame my family. I'm sharing it for that 24-year-old out there who's packing lunch every day, reinvesting every extra dollar, and building something in silence while being called an embarrassment by those who are supposed to love them. You don't have to announce your achievements. You don't have to justify your journey to anyone. Your work will speak for itself, whether it's with a loud bang or a quiet whisper, just like it did on that Thanksgiving dinner table in Connecticut. Keep going, and never give up on your dreams. If this story has touched you, hit that subscribe button because every week, we bring you real stories of resilience, quiet strength, and people who built something extraordinary when no one was watching. You won't want to miss what's coming next.